Before I was a Christian, I just assumed that there was no way that there could be evidence for such a thing. But when I finally looked into it, I couldn't believe how strong the evidence was. This book was written in 2003 by a colleague of myself and my teams at Oxford. He's widely considered to be the best British philosopher of religion of probably the last 60 years or so. And in this book, he concludes and argues that on the historical evidence today, it is 97% probable that Jesus truly, physically, miraculously rose from the dead. How in the world can he claim that and then have it published by Oxford University Press? There are lots of reasons that we could go into. Let me give you just one. Here's a passage written by the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians. I'll read it to you. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also. In the last few decades, experts have come to an agreement that this passage, which claims that more than 500 people saw Jesus and spent time with him after he had been crucified, and it says most of whom are still living. I love that line, almost as if to say, go out and ask them yourself. Experts agree now that this passage was actually the first summary of Christian beliefs. It was a type of creed, and it was passed around the early church. And it was in its current form almost immediately by historical standards after the events, probably within just months of the actual events. So it's now agreed by the majority of scholars who are experts in this area that almost immediately after Jesus' crucifixion, there were many people who were utterly convinced that they had spent time with Jesus after his death. And even the threat of torture and murder could not get them to change their minds. Pliny the Younger, he was a Roman governor in the first century. He was persecuting that first generation of Christians. And here's something that he wrote. He wrote, I ask them if they are Christians, and if they admit it, I repeat the question a second and a third time with a warning of the punishment awaiting them. If they persist, I order them to be led away for execution. Those who walked this earth with Jesus went from mourning the fact that their leaders seemed to have been defeated. Many of them were too scared to even be present at his crucifixion, to then accepting their own torture and deaths by execution rather than deny that Jesus was God. And all they had to do was deny it in word. All they had to do was say, fine, I'm not a Christian, and then go home and continue to worship Jesus in private. But even for their lives, they could not deny him. To that extent were they convinced that Jesus was the God that he claimed to be. What can account for this? How could every one of them be so utterly convinced that this dead man on a cross was actually worth dying for? Okay, it doesn't add up. Something happened. The bare facts of history demand that something extraordinary happened. The Christian response is the miraculous resurrection of Jesus Christ. If someone doesn't want to accept that explanation, then we can remind them that criticism without alternative is empty. If Jesus didn't actually rise, what are the alternative explanations? Could Jesus' resurrection have developed as a legend over time? No. No one takes that theory seriously anymore. Studies show that it takes about 3 generations for a significant amount of legendary development to make its way into a text. And as we've seen, the experts believe that this passage, which already claims the divinity and the appearances and the resurrection of Jesus, was already in its current form within just months of when the events actually took place. There was no time for legends to develop. Could it have been a hallucination? I think the answer is no. Multiple people don't see the same hallucination, let alone 500 people at once. And there were just far too many appearances in far too many places over far too many weeks for that to be plausible. Could it have been a big conspiracy, an elaborate lie? I don't think it could have been. Okay, people lie when they're getting something out of it. Okay, people don't lie when they're being executed and tortured for it. When I first looked into the evidence for the resurrection as an undergraduate at university, I was absolutely shocked with what I found, with where I thought the historical evidence led. And so I arranged meetings with two of my professors. They were two of the top atheist professors in the Princeton religion department. And I went to them and I just put to them, this is where what I'm reading seems to be pointing. Do you have an alternative explanation? One of them told me that they simply weren't interested in the question. The other glanced vaguely in the direction of a hallucination theory, but when pressed, had no substantiation to defend it. The disciples saw something, and it absolutely transformed their lives. It made them into the most courageous, moral followers the world has ever seen. What did they see? Okay, my answer is this: that God has provided confirmation for all by raising Jesus from the dead.